does someone like you, an academic, do you just assume big oil can sustain the moonshot?
I'd say basically what we're seeing is the boom bust cycle that has always been evident in oil and commodities, but oil in particular. Things were down for a while. Now they're way up. The big question is the typical cycle that we see is we get big investments in capex when oil companies' profits are high. And I'm not sure that we're going to be seeing that this time. And that could be a huge problem.
That's a constructive idea in that the rap is when things are good, they go off to the Arctic tundra and waste billions of dollars on a project that never pays off. Are those days over?
I definitely think those days are over. Everyone seems to have learned their lesson from that. The question is, are we going to see more than, say, $20 or $24 billion in capex investment this year from Exxon? And Exxon's one of the companies that actually is increasing production. They've increased production in the Permian. They're doing a lot of work in Guyana. They've made a lot of great discoveries there. And they really have a potential, I think, and the mindset to really go out there and do a lot more investment. But if we don't see more coming from them, I mean, put this in perspective, their profits this quarter are equal to what they're basically spending in capex for the year. That's just not nearly enough. And in today's environment, today's price environment, what we're seeing in terms of global production, we need massive amounts of investment now so that we actually have oil and gas in the future.
So, Ellen, we were talking about the political liability for the Exxons of the world, of which there's one. It's Exxon, I suppose, raising their dividend by 3 cents to 91 cents and really reporting just blockbuster earnings, how much blowback from the White House. Who has the upper hand here, though? Because Exxon could come back and say, look, we're actually providing the oil and the natural gas that you need to lower prices for consumers.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And there's definitely this back and forth going on with the White House. I would definitely expect to see, the White House come out guns blazing. Midterm elections are coming up and they're going to blast these oil companies for what they're doing with their profits and for the prices that consumers are currently paying at the pump. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to actually do anything to potentially harm these companies. Now, what's going on now is we've got lawsuits in a number of states, more than I think 24 across the country, that are trying to basically get oil companies, Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and others, to pay for infrastructure damage from climate change events. And the question is, are these lawsuits going to get thrown out, or are they going to go forward and could potentially be major drains on these companies' funds? So this is something that the White House could potentially influence and say, hey, pull back. I don't think they are.
Ellen, at the heart of this really is a question of how long the transition to a more dominant presence of cleaner energy we have ahead of us, right? I mean, if it's a 10-year window and some of these big oil majors are investing heavily in this, then there will be less cloud and there'll be less of a concern. How far away are we? What is the time frame? How significant will this be changing in terms of the sources of energy in a decade?
I think we're a lot farther away than we think we are, and that we think we are based on these companies' investments. If you look at the investments that they're actually making, particularly the American ones, the European ones invest a lot more in renewables than the American ones. And as a consequence, their profits this quarter are like 13% lower than the American companies. But a lot of these investments aren't real. So look at Chevron. They were a bit down because of their refining margins, but their sales for products were actually up because they acquired a renewable fuels company. Well, if their sales are up, but their profits are still lower, then is that company really worthwhile? Are these renewable fuels or synthetic fuels really profitable? And I think that's the question that these companies have to ask themselves as they go forward in this environment.
You moved on too quickly from that point. Can we sit on that, Ellen? Just for one more, the idea that the older energy companies not making the big renewable shift are doing better this year than those that have.
I mean, that just tells us that oil and gas legacy oil sources are still absolutely vital to our society, to the way that we function, to our modern life, and that they're going to continue to be. It's not like, just because people have decided they want to ban the sale of internal combustion cars in 2030, that means that we're all suddenly going to have this magical, great renewable source of fuel and transportation. That's just not likely to happen. And I think it is more likely that we will continue to see a very slow transition unless there's some extreme major breakthrough in technology. And oil and gas will be very important.